Welcome, everybody, to Firehouse Talks with Jersey Rick, Igniting Leadership Excellence. I'm Rick Davis, and this is my co-host, Emily. This is
Hello.
episode number 3. Is your communication clear? Thank you for watching today or listening. So, Emily, what are we going to be talking about today?
Well, I think we're talking about communication.
Oh, yes, that's right. We are communicating with one another.
But I think we should just dive right in.
Okay, let's
And
go ahead.
so, why is clear communication important?
What happens when you don't have clear communication? And one of the first things that comes to my mind is, we went to a local drive-through a couple years ago, and they had a special. It was a chocolate peanut butter crunch custard pulled
Whew,
up to the
that's a
drive.
tongue
Yes, it's a
twister.
mouthful. Pulled up to the drive-through. Me and my wife. And the guy on the other end says, "May I help you?" And I said, "Yes, I want one chocolate peanut butter crunch custard," just like that. And there was a pause. And he said, "Would you like mustard and onions on that?" And I looked at my wife and I said, "What? Would you like mustard and onions on that?" I said, "What did you think I ordered?" "Well, you ordered a number 1 cheeseburger." I said, "No, I didn't." And I told him what I ordered. So if communications are not clear,
Yeah.
something is going to get screwed up. Now, fortunately, that was only food that I was ordering. And I'm sure everybody who is listening or watching has had an experience at the drive-through. Not only a drive-through anymore. I mean, you could go right up to the
Oh,
counter
yeah.
and they're not paying attention to what you're ordering and they're getting things
Yeah.
screwed up. So when communication is not clear, the message is not coming across and something is going to be missed. Something is going to go wrong. We misunderstand each other. Communications is so vitally important.
The classic example of that is the game telephone that you
Yes.
can play.
Yes. And just in case somebody here who's listening is not familiar with that, you get a number of people, let's say 6 people. You take number 1 and you tell that person a very short story. And their responsibility now is to relay it to number 2 and then all the way down the line until it gets to number 6. And then number 6 is brought forward and is asked, "What were you told?"
Yeah.
And unless everybody along that line are exceptional at listening and then communicating the same thing, the message at number 6 most of the time is not anywhere close to
Totally jumbled.
yeah, totally jumbled to what number 1, started out saying.
Absolutely. So, what are the elements of communication?
Well, the basic elements of communication are you have the sender and you have the receiver
Mm,
and then the message. And we're practicing it right now. You and I are the senders.
yes.
Our voice and our message is going out over, the airwaves or however people are listening or watching this on YouTube. And then they are the receiver. But even though you and I are here and we are recording this podcast, somebody on the other end may not clearly hear what we have been talking about because of distractions. But those are the
Or
3
misunderstand your
or
Jersey accent.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, but those are the 3 elements of communication.
That makes sense. So, let's discuss why communication problems exist. And for several reasons, such as,
I want to throw that back out to you. What's your experience with communication issues? I want to hear your thoughts on why
Hmm.
you believe they exist, and then I'll add to it.
well, I think the main one is they're not listening. There are distractions, whether it's distractions externally or there can be internal distractions where they're asking you a question and you give them the answer, but then they're in their own little world or they're thinking about other things and they don't hear you correctly at all. Sometimes, in some cases, they're not really wanting to listen at all either.
Mm.
Um, So I think, yeah, I think the listening and the paying attention really comes into play.
Absolutely, yeah. And that is definitely the case. Distractions. Have you ever dealt with people who interrupt?
Yes.
Yes, and interrupting is
Yes.
is a rude habit, and I'm going to give you an example here in a few seconds. But typically, what I have seen with interruptions is somebody is thinking ahead of what they want to say. They want to respond already, and they're not
Yeah.
hearing anything that you say, and then they cut you off.
And that's the key. It's not even just listening, but just hearing what you're saying.
Right, right.
Mhm.
And I experienced this a couple weeks ago at church on a Sunday morning.
Mm.
I was talking to a gentleman. He and I were having a face to face conversation. And then this other guy shows up out of the left. He comes in, he turns his shoulder against me like that and just starts a conversation with this guy.
Wow.
And the guy that I was talking to didn't stop it. He allowed it to continue. Well, yeah, you know what, folks? That's just rude and ignorant behavior.
Very.
If you are practicing that, it's wrong.
Stop it.
Yeah, stop it. Yes, there's an ethical issue, there's a character issue that's
Yeah.
taking place because the person who does that, they think that they are so important that they only value themselves. They are demonstrating that they have no value, no regard for any place else.
Yeah.
That's just another other reason why some of the communications problems, exist in our world today. People are self-centered and they don't care about anybody else. It's
Yep.
only them.
Yep.
People who interrupt are rude. I had to confront an individual on my shift several years ago who consistently interrupted.
Mm.
And, after a while, I asked him, I said, "So what is it that makes you do this?" And he said, "Do what?" I said, "Interrupt." I am.
Like they get in the habit so much they don't even know they're
Right.
doing it.
They get in the habit so much that they don't even know that they are interrupting. And I pointed out to him, different examples, including the one that had just occurred before I asked him that question. And to his credit, he worked on that. He worked on listening. Now, hey, it's one thing if you need to interrupt, because something's going on. It needs to be addressed right now. That's one story. I remember several years back, and this happened more than one time. I had a fire chief, and I was talking to him out in the bay of the station, and you heard the doorbell ring. One of the firefighters went and answered it. Well, it came in the city manager, and mid sentence, the chief just turned away from me and walked away. Just, it's like, wow.
Wow.
How do you think that made me feel?
I was just gonna say it makes that person or you in that situation feel very unimportant and not
Yeah,
valued and that they don't really care what you have to say. They're just letting
they
you talk.
yeah, they were just letting me talk, saying, "Oh, I'm gonna let Davis think that I'm listening to what he is saying." It's like, no, oh, somebody else of perceived importance, came into the when you're talking to somebody and someone else comes up and they want to interrupt the conversation, your response needs to be, "Excuse me, I'll get to you in a moment as soon as I finish this conversation."
Yeah.
Now, if they're running up and they're saying, "Hey, Betty's choking on a piece of steak back in the lunchroom," that's a bona fide interruption. And I'd say, "Did anybody call 911?"
Yeah.
So, yeah, in the, so many of these problems with communication exist because of our egos and we are self-centered, or
Yeah.
we think that we are better than the other person. I am more educated. And, I have dealt with people even just over the last couple of years. They have made comments that are direct attacks on the type of training that I and certifications that I have received through the John Maxwell team.
Hmm.
It's like, oh, well, I know you haven't received the same type of, training that I have,
Wow.
because, and this one individual just flat out said, because I am a PhD. Like, oh,
Good
geez.
for you.
Yeah, good for you. Yeah, you might be a PhD, but you're clearly demonstrating that you don't have any common sense in
Yeah.
how to communicate with somebody else. You hit the distractions, distractions of, communication. And, it doesn't take much for people to be distracted anymore.
No.
So,
I think also too, where communication can break down is that you're making assumptions about the other person and you're not willing to either think on the truth first, or you're not willing to ask them to see if your assumptions are even right or accurate.
yes, that's interesting that you brought that point up, Emily. As I've been recording, the Furnace of Leadership Development for the audio book
Yeah.
yesterday, I went through chapter 5, which the title is Shedding Bias Towards Subordinates. And I
Mhm.
relay a story that happened to me when I, got moved to a different shift one year, and I had a shift commander that after he showed up at the station and laid out his expectations, he said, I want to talk to you. And we went out to the truck bay, and he just went off on me and said, I know who you are. I know what you're all about, blah, 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 blah.
Hmm.
And we had only worked a couple of overtime shifts together because we were on opposite shifts.
Yeah.
I've always been a rather vocal individual, and when I've seen something wrong, I'll speak up and talk about it. Well, this individual was definitely more towards that political realm. I'm going to kiss people's rear ends and so
Hmm.
forth like that.
Yeah.
Uh, he did not know me. He had his preconceived notions about me, and he had already passed judgment about me just because I spoke up.
Wow.
So, hey, the story there, folks, is in that chapter. The big ticket items with bias are usually, race issues, gender issues, hostile work environment, things like that. But you rarely ever hear anything said, about a supervisor already coming in with a preconceived notion about somebody else. Based off of a reputation and how they treat them. So that right then and there lays the foundation for poor communications, and issues they absolutely will erupt down the road. How do we value people? How do you value the people that you work with? How do you value the people that are aside you, the
Mhm.
people that are serving you in the restaurant? How do you value the people who are mopping the floor, the ones that are changing your oil? Yeah. How are you communicating with them? Are you communicating with them as they are another human being? Or are you talking down to them
Yeah.
because in your mind, you're of a much higher status than what they are? Think about that.
Yeah. So while you're thinking about that, so John Maxwell wrote a book called Everyone Communicates, Few Connect.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about why connection is important
Yeah,
when it comes
that's
to
great. Could
communication.
you hold that up?
Yep,
We
for those who are
mentioned that for the
watching.
people who are listening, but for those who are watching, yep, there it is right there. That was Maxwell's first book on communications. Everyone communicates, few connect. And I'll throw in the second book that he's just written on communication that came out towards the end of 2023, The 16 Undeniable Laws of Communication. I've mentioned that I'm a member of the John Maxwell team, and I've done a lot of reading of his books over the years. And there's two fantastic books there, folks. This is a leadership show, and communication is part of leadership. We're essentially everything leadership, is what Emily and
Yeah.
I are talking about on this podcast right here. But you cannot communicate with somebody if you don't connect with them. And I'm going beyond the fact that you show up at the coffee shop and you're ordering a cup of coffee. Hey, be friendly to those people. All right. My other daughter, Rebecca, she worked as a on a wait staff at Cracker Barrel, and then she worked at Ziggy's and a
Yep,
drive-through
barista.
coffee. And some of the stories that she would share with us about how people treated not only her, but
Yeah.
her coworkers because they were waiting on tables or they're in this little kiosk and people are pulling up. But there's others who were absolutely, fantastic.
Yeah.
You know what? You're going someplace on a consistent basis. You could develop a connection. Emily and I, we have a coffee shop down the street here from us that we like to visit rather frequently.
Yeah.
And there's some of the baristas in there that we see regularly. We know their names, they know our names. We have connected with them. And when you start to connect with somebody, you're opening up the doors to be able to pour your life into them. Like, whoa, whoa, whoa there, Davis. What do you mean pour my life into them? I don't want anything to do with that. Oh, yeah? Well, go back, and watch one of the previous episodes, number 2, where we talked about integrity.
Yeah.
It's not just about you. When we connect, doors open up. I mentioned in episode number 1 out of the Bible, Luke chapter 12, verse 48, to whom much is given, much is required. To whom more is given, even more is required. Connecting with people, sharing your experiences and opportunities with people when the opportunity presents itself. I'm not talking about shoving it down their throat. And that goes back to some of the communications things, people who manipulate the conversation.
Yeah.
And you and I, Emily, we both know people who do that.
Yes.
And that is not connecting. That is lecturing. That's that
controlling.
Controlling
Yeah.
and lecturing. So connecting is important. And my wife, we laugh about this a lot, is she thinks she's got an invisible sign on her forehead that says, "Tell me."
Tell me your story.
Yes, tell me,
Yeah.
tell me your story.
Yeah.
And you've even seen that with yourself.
Yeah.
As well. And it's the people out there that are carrying something and they're looking for someone
Who will listen.
who will
Who's
listen.
caring and will listen to them.
You're right. Absolutely right. And I'm sure everybody has heard this before, is you don't know what the other person, is going through.
Absolutely.
And so that's why connection is important. And especially for us as Christians, because God is using us now as an instrument to minister into their lives and to help them, staying in tune, with what God wants for us. And he's putting people in front of us who also just might be, is they just want somebody to listen, somebody to hear what they're going through, because nobody else is listening to them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons why connecting is important. And it also goes back to the trust and the credibility that we talked about in episode number 2.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also is that communication is a two-way street. It's not just a one person just talking and the other one is listening. It's going back and forth and sharing ideas, sharing thoughts, sharing your heart, and being willing to listen to that person too. And not being of the mindset that you're going to get the final say either.
Right. And when you mentioned that there, I was reminded of a networking meeting that I had a couple years ago on Zoom, and I was connected with an individual, and I just happened to look down at the time, and it was 1:27 p.m. when he started talking, and he kept talking and talking and talking. And I thought, I'm going to turn this into an experiment. I want to see how long this guy talks before he shuts up. It was 2:02.
Wow.
1:27 to 2:02.
Did he take a breath?
No, he just kept talking. And then his comment was, well, I guess I should stop talking. I talk a lot. I should hear what you've got to say. I thought,
Like you think?
No fooling, pal. Hey, that's not connecting.
No.
That is not a conversation. As I've run my business, which is the Fire Officer Leadership Academy, and I do a lot of networking since I have started a business back when I was still on the job. Yeah, one of the mantras that I consistently hear is people do business with people they know, like, and trust.
Yeah.
If we are not connecting with people, you're not going to trust them whatsoever. And I actually believe that may be leading into something else that we want to talk about here shortly.
Yeah. Well, I think you have an example of what you want to give us about connection.
Mhm.
So can you share that with us,
Yes.
please?
Ding dong, the doorbell goes. And I go upstairs and I look through the peephole, and there's a guy out there. Now we got a little sign on our door that says no trespassing, no soliciting. And I'm looking, and I say, okay, this guy looks like he might be the UPS guy. So I open up the door after I control our dog Java. She's going crazy.
Yeah.
And here this guy is, and he tells me, hey, I'm painting at your neighbor's house, and your house is damaged and it needs to be painted. And I says, I'm not interested. And I tapped the glass, pointing to the sign. I said, no soliciting. I'm not interested. And he was trying to keep going on about damage on my house and how it needs to be. I am not going to let some schmo who rings my doorbell
Yeah.
paint my house. I don't know this guy. Now I have met.
Well, and it's not good to start out saying your house is damaged. Like you
Yeah,
should,
that's right.
word it
Yeah.
a little bit better.
Yeah, it's like, hey,
Like,
Mac.
would you be interested in your house being painted?
Absolutely. He's like, hey, Mac, your communication skills are damaged
Yeah.
because you're not building any trust. You're not building any credibility
Mm.
with me. I'm not going to do business with you. As a matter of fact, through the networking that I do, I know a couple other painters, and I'm going to go to them first because I've gotten to know them,
Yeah.
and people are recommending them, and they're doing good work. Yeah, not this guy coming up here who clearly has no communication skills.
Yeah.
Clearly, I don't even think this guy was doing any work in the neighbors. Afterwards, I went outside to see where he was at to see if there was a vehicle, and I saw him about 2 blocks away walking up and down on the street. Yeah,
Mhm.
hey, he's just some kind of shyster that's trying to jump up business. Like
Yeah.
after the hailstorm hits the neighborhood. Yeah, and all these clowns show up from out of state and they want to repair your roof. Yeah, you're not connecting.
Yeah. So you gave us an example of what not to do,
Mhm.
but is there a trick to connecting with others in the right
Yes,
way?
yes. Number one is called be friendly.
Mm,
Be friendly. That is something that is lacking in our society today.
absolutely. I mean,
Um,
people are just so rude, so angry. It's a very me
mhm.
culture. What's in it for me? Get it to me in the time that I want it. And the
Absolutely.
friendliness is completely thrown out the window.
Absolutely. It's now shocking and surprising when you run into somebody who is actually friendly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah,
Yeah.
what's the secret? Be friendly. Smile at people. You know, when you're like this,
All sad and
and on your
on your
phone,
phone.
like that, yeah, you're definitely sending a message. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to anybody. You
Yeah.
know, in order to connect with people, we got to be friendly and we got to be open, and we have to work on the ability to have a conversation.
Yeah, which is lacking in
Mhm.
these days too. People just don't know how to socially connect
A-
anymore.
Absolutely.
It's terrible. It's like pulling teeth or they just go away and then you're just left
Mhm.
standing.
There's a great example if you search YouTube of connecting, and it's when Johnny Carson used to be the host at a Tonight Show, and he would be introduced by Ed McMahon. Yeah, and Ed would say, "And here's Johnny." And Johnny Carson would walk out in the stage and he would have his monologue and he would tell jokes. But when you watch this, when I watched it on television and sometimes I watch it up on YouTube, is even though he was the Lone Ranger on the stage, he was connecting with the audience.
Mm,
And he knew when he was really connecting. Even if one of his jokes went flat, then he turned it around back on him and he would evoke a funny response from the audience.
Hmm.
You know, he was a master of communication. Larry King was another one who had a talk show. Well, they called it a talk show, but he was always interviewing somebody.
Yeah.
He was just a master of being able to communicate. Ask questions of
Yeah.
people when you have when you have that opportunity. It's like I gave you the example here a few moments ago of the guy who rambled on from 127 to 202. And then when he did allow me to speak, there was no questions that were being asked. There was nothing there. It was like, so Rick, how long have you been doing this? Like, hey, I see on your website you have a book. Tell me about your book. Yeah, you don't connect with anybody when it's constantly one way.
Yeah.
And just saying, okay, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let you talk. And it's like, oh, and then they're interrupting you. No, you're not connecting. So yeah, the trick, be friendly, listen, ask questions.
That's great. So, what happens when leaders do not communicate with their subordinates?
Problems are created, stories will be created.
Mm,
And I definitely have seen this in the fire department. I'm sure it occurs in a corporate environment as well. But when you have a fire department, and depending on the number of stations, they could actually turn into literally, they might have one name, but it could literally turn into a number of different little fire departments. And then you multiply that by 3 shifts, or some departments are operating 4 shifts, and the communication gets bad. That's why in the last episode I was talking about the importance, of the battalion chief getting out into the stations and communicating with the troops,
yeah.
passing on information and giving them the opportunity to ask questions, because I have seen it. I have lived this myself. It's like, okay, what aren't they telling us? What's really going on? And then people start to create stories, and then rumors get started, and it's just an avalanche effect
Like a
after
downward
that.
spiral.
Yep, it's a downward spiral, and then it can be a lot of work to recover from that.
Hmm, that's very interesting. Well, do you have any more final thoughts before we wrap up our podcast
And
episode?
my final thought about communication is, again, I would recommend buying those 2 John Maxwell books. And if you don't like reading them, get them in audio and listen to them, because communication is part of leadership, and leadership involves communication. Get over yourself, get over your ego, and be friendly and listen to people. So, with that being said, that's all we have today for episode number 3. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jersey Rick, and this is my co host, Emily, and
We'll
we'll
see you
see
next
you
time.
next time. Bye.